that if we don't defeat communism, we just aren't going to be free, and many of us won't even be alive to continue the ideological debate.
皆さん、こんにちは。この動画を後で全部流しますので、その前に背景の説明をします。説明がいらない方は直接本題の方に飛んでください。まず、この動画の長さを見ても、諦めずにクリックしていただいたことに感謝します。いつもより長い動画ですが、このチャンネルで皆さんに紹介した動画の中でも、最重要動画のランクに入る動画です。今日の動画は前編です。制作が間に合ったら、明日後編をアップします。前編と後編は同じ人が話す動画です。2つの動画の元動画はどちらも1時間を超える動画になりますので、なんとか20分ぐらいに短くしたものです。ですので、途中で接続が不自然な部分もあります。ご了承ください。また、この動画の元動画を非表示にしてアップロードしてみたら制限ではなく、ポリシー違反で一発で削除されました。つまり、この動画は今 YouTube で制限を受けています。ですので、元動画のリンクは少し落ち着いた後、動画のコメント欄に貼るようにします。ご了承ください。今回の動画で話す人はエドワード・グリフィンです。彼はアメリカの作家、映画制作者です。彼は今年90歳で、今回皆さんに紹介する動画は彼の53年前のレクチャーです。彼はこのレクチャーでマルクス主義と共産主義について説明をして、具体例や文献に基づいて、なぜ共産主義は世界中で勝利を手に入れているのかについて話をします。今回の2つの動画を作成する中で、私も自分のマルクス主義、社会主義、共産主義などに対する認識を深めることができました。本当に良い勉強になったと思います。今まで私の動画の中でもそこまで区別しませんでしたが、これから区別してできるだけ正しい定義で話をしていきたいと思います。この53年前の動画を見ると、まるで今のアメリカの話をしているような感じがします。また、他の社会主義国家、例えば中国のことを話しているような感じがします。つまり、共産主義思想は時間と空間を超えて、今の世界に深刻なインパクトを与えていることがわかります。他の動画でも話をした通り、これはアメリカの学者がアメリカの問題を中心に話す動画ですが、この動画を見ている皆さんは、今自分が生活している国はどういう状況になっているのかを考えながら聞いた方が、もっと理解が深まり、ためになる動画に変わると思います。私の話はここまでにします。では、どうぞ。
The political spectrum concept, if it has any meaning at all, is a measurement scale showing all the variations in government, ranging from 0 at one end to 100% at the other. Now, the extremists at the 0 end would be those who advocate no government at all, the anarchists. The extremists at the other end would be those who advocate total government. And who are they? Well, the communists, of course, but also the Nazis, the fascists, and any others, no matter what they may call themselves, if they advocate total government control over the people, they are all, by definition, totalitarians. Communism and Nazism are not opposites. Call it right or left, it makes no difference. They're both at the same totalitarian end of the political spectrum. Long after communism has been destroyed and relegated to the dusty pages of history, these same forces will continue to plague future generations as well, but under a new name. What are these forces? There are two. There are always two, and there are only two. The first we've already identified, collectivism, total government. And the second, amorality, merely a 25-cent word for the complete absence of true moral standards of any kind. These are the twin forces of despotism everywhere, past, present, or future. Peel off the label communism, or fascism, or Nazism, or any other similar ism from history, and what do you find? Although the exterior form may be different, the essence is always the same: total government over the people, and the abandonment of morality in public life. Collectivism and amorality. Now, we think it's important to understand this because otherwise, in our zeal to overcome communism, the American people could be maneuvered unwittingly into replacing communism with merely another form of the same thing. In the 20s, the unsuspecting people of Germany became alarmed over the inroads being made in their country by domestic communism. And then Adolf the paper hanger came along and said, "Follow me, I'll get rid of communism for you." So they followed him, and he did get rid of communism. But he put in its place exactly the same thing, only under a different flag. The good people of Germany never stopped to ask what Hitler offered behind his anti-communist slogans and promises of welfare. Most of them had never read Mein Kampf, and of those who did, very few really knew what they were reading. They were unable to recognize those opposing jaws that always constitute tyranny: collectivism and amorality. And so, in their zeal to avoid tyranny, and through their ignorance of the nature of tyranny, they were manipulated into tyranny. And it was all done through the democratic process. Remember, Hitler was voted into power. Could this happen in America? You bet it could. The process has already begun. In the name of opposing communism, we are now plunging headlong into collectivism at a rate unparalleled in history. What meaning would a victory over communism have if, in the process, we embrace total government and abandon our morality? Yet the form of tyranny called communism is still very real. It can't be ignored. All questions of theory aside, the plain fact is that if we don't defeat communism, we just aren't going to be free, and many of us won't even be alive to continue the ideological debate. And so, even though the defeat of communism is not our primary objective, of life and death necessity, it becomes our first order of business. If we are to know our opponent, therefore, we must now answer the question, what is communism? Now, actually, that's not nearly as hard a question to answer as you might think. The communists themselves give us the definition. They call it Marxism-Leninism, which means simply that communism is a combination of the ideological teachings of Karl Marx and the organizational strategy and tactics laid down by Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov Lenin. Now, all we have to do, really, is understand the ideology of Marx and the tactics of Lenin. And in spite of the thickness of their books, neither one is very hard to grasp. If you've read the Communist Manifesto or Das Kapital, then you know that Karl Marx taught only two things: socialism and atheism. Everything else was in support of these two concepts: socialism and atheism. By the way, notice that these are merely different words for collectivism and amorality. And we're back to that again, the essential ingredients for any tyranny. But the words he preferred to use were socialism and atheism. So let's use those. While Marx laid down the ideological base of communism, Lenin created the Communist Party and added the physical organizational form. If you agree with Karl Marx that socialism and atheism are ideologically sound, then by definition you are a Marxist. But that doesn't make you a communist by a long shot. If, in addition to being a Marxist, you also are willing to join the Communist Party founded by Lenin, are willing to subject yourself to the discipline of the party, and unhesitatingly follow the organizational tactics and strategy laid down by the party, then you are a Marxist-Leninist, and then you are a true communist. Therefore, if we are to know our opponent, we must know that communism is not just an ideology, for that would be only Marxism. It is both an ideology and an organization. Let me repeat that because it's the foundation for everything that follows. Communism is both an ideology and an organization. Let's turn now to the record. This book by Nikita Khrushchev, entitled Socialism and Communism, was printed in English and published in Moscow. Back here on page 158, Khrushchev said, "The Communist Party, founded and tempered by the great Lenin, is a powerful force, comrades. Without the party, we would have been an unorganized mass of people. Now, note that line. Without the party, we would have been an unorganized mass of people. It's a very important concept, and we'll come back to it later. All of us communists are united by the great Marxist-Leninist ideas. The source of our party's strength and invincibility lies in its ideological and organizational cohesion. And so I repeat, communism is both an ideology and an organization. Joseph Cornfetter was one of the original charter members of the Communist Party in America. He joined in 1919. He received special training in Moscow and returned to this country dedicated to the cause of world communism. And then, like so many others, gradually he began to see through the intellectual deception of the communist promise. He broke away from the party and became an equally dedicated anti-communist. Now, in 1955, Joseph Cornfetter gave a speech in San Francisco. And I'd like to read to you one paragraph taken directly from the transcript of that speech. Cornfetter said, "The true characteristics of the Communist Party are to be found not so much in its theories as in its methods of organization. Keep in mind that they are applying a new concept of warfare, the concept of conquering a country from within. How do you conquer a country from within? You conquer it by capturing the organizations that operate inside the country. A labor union, a farm organization or newspaper guild, a teachers' association, a political club, a government agency, etc., are considered as power centers. The sum total of these organizations is the sum total of power. The Communist Party organizes inside of these organizations group by group. To fight them effectively, one has to do the same thing in reverse. Mere resolution passing can't cope with that sort of an enemy." End quote. Of course, that's certainly true. Mere resolution passing, merely declaring loudly that we're against communism, cannot cope with that sort of an enemy. Now, Lenin, the founder of the Communist Party, explained it this way, and I quote, "The party is the conscious advanced section of a class, its advance guard. The power of this advance guard is 100 times greater than its numbers. Is that possible? Can the power of 100 exceed the power of thousands? It can exceed it when the hundreds are organized. Organization increases power by tenfold." End quote. And this, of course, is the reason why the communists have been winning around the world. Not because they're smarter or because they outnumber their opposition, but simply because they're organized. A handful has had the power and effect of thousands. You know, occasionally someone will say to me, "Aren't you rather silly, worried about communism in this country, when there are so few of them? What harm can such a small group do to a big, strong country like ours?" Of course, such people have not done their homework. They have no idea of how communism actually works. Well, they've heard a little bit about the Marxist ideology of communism, but they know nothing about the Leninist organization of communism. They're unaware, for instance, that in the Soviet Union, even after all of these years, the actual number of people who are communists, members of the party, are less than 3% of the total population. In Red China, less than 2%. But more important than that, at the time of takeover, communists have come to power in one country after another with no more than 1/2 of 1% of the population, and in some cases, much less than that. Massive numbers are not important in this phase of the battle. If you remember nothing else I say in this entire presentation, please remember that. Ideology is important. Numbers are not. Dedication is important. Numbers are not. Organization is extremely important. Numbers are not. Now, in addition to the advantage of organization, our communist opposition also has the flexibility of being able to resort to completely amoral tactics. Lenin taught that whatever helps to bring communism to power is moral. The only test is, does it work? The leaders of world communism are forever saying that they want peaceful coexistence. Let our two systems, let our two ideologies compete fair and square. They say, let the best ideology win. They always talk about their ideology, but you notice they never say anything about their organization. We're not supposed to even notice that they also have an organization with working units established in every country in the world. And while they're talking about open and fair competition between ideologies, their organization is getting ready to pull the rug right out from underneath us, if it can. Again, let's turn to the record. Benjamin Gitlow, the author of this book, was for many years one of the most important communists in the entire world. He was General Secretary of the Communist Party, USA, a member of the Executive Committee of the Communist Internationale in Moscow, and a full member of the Presidium, the very highest ruling group within the world communist movement. But like so many others, Gitlow broke away from the Communist Party and became an anti-communist. After doing so, he wrote this book, The Whole of Their Lives, telling of his own personal experiences. This is a vital document, written by a man who speaks not from hearsay or from research, but from first-hand experience. Now, Gitlow describes a series of street meetings that were staged by the Communist Party on the Lower East Side of New York. After the crowd had gathered to applaud the party speakers, a fight broke out between the party members and their opposition. Now, the fight was expected. There had been others in the past, and this one had been planned for with great care. After the party goon squads had thoroughly beaten their opposition, then here is how Gitlow describes what happened. He says, and I quote, "But what the mob below did not know was that on the roof of the tall tenement, a number of communists were hidden in the dark shadows of the building's cornice. Below, another communist standing aside from the crowd waited to give a fateful signal. The signal was given when the communists controlled the corner with their own people. Heavy cobblestones of granite came hurtling down in the darkness. One communist, Nick Kruzek, a simple ordinary worker, was taken to the hospital where he died of a fractured skull. Another, Michael Seaman, a hard-working Slav, died in the hospital the next morning." Now, Gitlow then describes how the murders were used to create martyrs for the communist cause and to whip up hatred against those of their opposition who presumably were the only ones with motive for such a crime. And then Gitlow says, "Such premeditated murders of communists by communists had taken place before and were considered justified by the political objectives of communist necessity. They will be repeated. The time, the place, and the circumstances will be different. The incentives the same." Now this, too, we must know about our opponent if we are not to be fools and suffer defeat in every battle. Some time ago, the Communist Party published this little booklet entitled A Manual on Organization. It contains their detailed plans for disciplining members, collecting dues, operating secret printing presses, organizing cells in factories, colleges, and farming communities. It even describes the function of a fraction, a unit smaller than the cell itself. A fraction can be composed of two or more communists within the same non-communist organization. Their task is to work together secretly for the purpose of gaining control of that organization, the very process described earlier by Joseph Cornfetter. Now, if you haven't read this, and of course most non-communists have not, then it's almost impossible to appreciate the degree to which communism depends on organization rather than ideology. But getting back to the subject of tactics, there's a particularly revealing passage back here on page 122. They're discussing how to handle former comrades who break away from the party, and particularly those who have the audacity to testify before congressional investigating committees. And here's what they say. "There is only one proper method of exposing the stool pigeons, and that is mass exposure, creating and organizing mass hatred against these rats. 1. Photograph the spy and print his picture in leaflets and stickers. Spread this material in the place where the spy was operating. 2. Organize systematic agitation among the workers where the spy was discovered. 3. Mobilize the children and women in the block in the part of town where the stool pigeon lives to make his life miserable. Let them picket the store where his wife purchases groceries and other necessities. Let the children in the street shout after him or after any member of his family that they are spies, rats, stool pigeons. 4. Chalk his home with the slogan, so-and-so who lives here is a spy, etc. In October of 1965, a high-ranking official of the Hungarian Communist Party defected to the West. He held the rank of major in the AVH secret police. His name was Laszlo Szabo. A few months later, he testified in hearings before the CIA subcommittee of the Congressional Committee on Armed Services. Now, during his testimony, Laszlo Szabo explained the operation of a special department within the secret police in charge of what they called disinformation. Really, it was the everyday job of this department of disinformation to manufacture and promote lies that could be useful worldwide against America. Now, in the center portion of these hearings, there's a photograph of 2 editions of Newsweek magazine, and they were released in November and December of 1963. Now, as you can see, the first carries a cover with a picture of Senator Barry Goldwater, and the second, a picture of President Kennedy. Now, the interesting thing about these issues is that they never appeared in the United States. They're complete phonies. They were printed on the secret presses of the Department of Disinformation in Hungary, and then widely disseminated in Europe, Africa, Asia, Latin America, as powerful weapons of anti-American propaganda. Superior ideology? Hardly. A perfect example of communist organization at work. After describing this incident in detail, Laszlo Szabo then said, Major Janos Fures, Chief of Special Activities, the unit responsible for disinformation work in the Hungarian service, he told me they preferred that an item for disinformation should have some real basis in fact. But if I can produce a good idea that does not have any fact, send it in anyway. Truth is not important if the idea is good. Just send it in, they'll make it look truthful, then get it published in some little newspaper somewhere, and after that we will hand it out, get it republished everywhere. Who can prove it is not true? End quote. In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters to all communists in the United States. It read, when certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind.
いかがでしたでしょうか？このような本質がわかる動画を知った上で、今起きていることを見ると、いろんなことがわかりやすくなると思います。ちなみに、左に向いているウィキペディアで、この方は陰謀論者になっています。もちろん、彼の他の一部の理論に主流の意見と違う説もありますが、彼を陰謀論者というレッテルを貼ってしまうと、このようなレクチャーも制限されるコンテンツになってしまいます。うまくいけば明日後編を公開します。この動画をベースに後編を見ると、もっと認識が深まると思います。これからもこのような話をしていきますので、ご興味がある方はぜひフォロー、コメント、拡散をお願いします。また、このチャンネルを応援していただける方は、ぜひメンバーシップもご検討ください。では、また次回お会いしましょう。ハラノタイムズがお届けしました。